At this time, I look forward to hearing from my good friend from the state of Texas, Congressman Jody Arrington, who once again joins us in defense of freedom and traditional American values of limited government and free enterprise, and stands firmly in opposition to the bankruptcy of socialism.
I want to thank my dear friend from the Commonwealth of Kentucky and a stalwart when it comes to freedom, a champion of free people, free states, and free markets. And I appreciate my dear friend for hosting this very important and timely discussion to articulate the virtue and the values of freedom. It's hard to believe we can stand in this great chamber that with any need to distinguish between a free system and a free country, and what happens when you lose those freedoms. America is the most powerful, most prosperous, and most generous nation in the world. And it's because America is the freest nation in the history of the world and on the face of the planet. And the quickest way for America to lose her shine, her brilliance, her exceptionalism, is for her to lose her freedoms. Mr. Speaker, when our founding fathers were framing the more perfect union, they made the central determination that our constitutional republic would limit the federal government's role in our lives. They believed that if they limited government, they would unleash the limitless potential of the American people, free people, created in the image of God. And while we recognize the challenges of our fallen human condition in any system of government, nothing has been a greater force for good, save and except the love of God, than freedom. Indeed, nothing has elevated and empowered the human spirit in this country and across the globe like the free enterprise system. Over the course of the 20th century, we can see the profound impact of free markets on the lives of Americans. In 1900, the average life expectancy of Americans was 47 years, and by the end of the century, it was 78 years. At the beginning of the 20th century, 56% of American families were considered poor, but by 1967, before the expansion of the American welfare state through the Great Society programs, the number of American families considered poor was only 13%. I would also insert there that we've spent trillions of dollars since the advent of big government welfare programs, well-intended, of course, trillions, over $20 trillion since the 1960s. We spend 16 times today what we spent in the 60s on welfare programs, and we haven't moved the needle a bit. The poverty rate is the same. So, if we look at the 20th century alone, we can see that free markets have given Americans the most opportunities, the highest standard of living, and the best quality of life anywhere in the world. Now, contrast this with Venezuela. Previously one of the wealthiest nations in the Western Hemisphere, blessed with an abundance of oil and gas reserves, which is the basis of their economic prosperity. Today, 82% of Venezuelans live in poverty, thanks to the legacy of socialist policies implemented by the late dictator Hugo Chavez and his successor, Nicolas Maduro. Contrast that with what we've been doing recently with President Trump over the last few years, and in my first term in the 115th Congress. We have promoted freedom and freer markets, fair trade. We've put in place this pro-growth free market policies that have unleashed even greater economic potential of these United States. We've seen historic unemployment, historic wage increases. We've seen trillions of dollars in wealth created in the stock markets for those who need pensions, 401ks, folks saving for retirement. The list is long, but the message is that if you get off the backs and out of the way of our entrepreneurs, our innovators, our risk takers, They will do what they do best, and that's create opportunities. But all of these opportunities, this record growth, these benefits for American families are at risk. Our country, my dear friend Mr. Barr, is at an ideological inflection point. We can continue to build on the success and prosperity from free markets, or we can go down the road to serfdom that you mentioned. And I don't think we need to look any further than the poll that Mr. Johnson mentioned, where 7 out of 10 millennials are, quote, somewhat or extremely likely to vote for a socialist candidate. 80 million strong. 70% of the generation that will make up the largest voting bloc in the next election is leaning towards voting for a socialist. Not in Cuba or in Venezuela, right here in the United States of America. John Adams told us, "You'll never know how much it cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it." Folks, right now we're in grave danger of forsaking the freedoms for which our founders fought. If we go down this ruinous road of socialism, the choice we make as Americans will determine our nation's identity for the remainder of the 21st century. It's a choice between whether our future will be forged by freedom and faith, both in God and in our founding principles, or whether we're going to submit to the rise of socialism and the tyranny of big government. We have to be vigilant and do everything in our power to ensure the arc of the future bends towards freedom, not government control over every aspect of our lives. Because only if we do this, only if we protect these precious freedoms, will we give our children and grandchildren the freedoms and opportunities that every generation of Americans have enjoyed. Thank you, Mr. Barr, for the opportunity to join you in this special order. Thank you for your intentionality to bring this topic for discussion and for including me. And I want to yield back to my friend from the Commonwealth of Kentucky.